Thank you, Coach. Thank you, Chris, for joining me tonight. Now we're going to transition over, stay on the D2 level, a lot of D2 ball tonight, but we are going to talk some small school prospects. We got, like I said in the opener, 5 guys tonight that I wanted to highlight that I think have a really good chance of making some waves at the next level, whether that is, we talked about it before, this doesn't mean they're getting drafted or they're even going to the NFL. This is playing professional ball, right? And whatever opportunity they get is going to be a great one. Let's start with a guy that we've actually had the pleasure of having on the show, and that's the man right here, Trey Vavel, and he's a guy that is a very multifaceted dude, and admittedly, I don't have a ton of tape on, but here's some of the pro day, training that he's kind of gone through, and just to see his face for those of you who remember that we had him on a while back, and like I said earlier, Trey's a guy that is very multidimensional. I'm going to show you exactly what that means. He's a defensive back for Minnesota State Mankato, but what you'll see from him in a little bit is that potentially his best attribute on the field is actually his kick return ability and what he does on special teams. Now, he did get out to a pro day over at Minnesota, I do believe. So here's a couple of flicks that he put out from the pro day, and couldn't find too much on the actual number from that experience, but seemed to be pretty high spirits after that one. Have to assume he showed up and showed out and put on a show for those guys and all of the scouts. But what I did want to take a look at, and something I alluded to, it's something we talk about with a lot of these small school products, is how do you get your foot in the door? And Trey is a guy that had a lot of big-time plays at Mankato, but he actually got his start over at Missouri Western before he transferred over to MSU, if you will. So they got a nice little compilation of some of his better returns put together here, and I wanted to flip these on for you guys because this is a dude that I had it written down a really great combination of point A to point B explosiveness as in terms of somebody who is a straight line runner. But what you'll see here is that combination is paired with what I would call a phone booth style quickness, where he's able to make moves and navigate in really confined small spaces. And that's something that translates to the defensive back position, I think, very well when you're trying to match up with someone. Here's more of the point A to point B. The dude can just outrun you, and this is going to be a chance for him to get into, whether it is a mini camp or some type of bigger NFL or CFL, UFL, whatever it is, those kind of opportunities, whatever that is for him. That kick return ability is going to be a very important one for Trey, and I'm excited to see what he does. He was a 3-time All-American, NSIC first teamer, special teams player of the year. The dude has a lot of the accolades to go with that, and we kind of talked about that explosive set and that skill set that he has. But when it comes to measurements, he has a decent build. About 6 foot, 170 pounds, so certainly could probably stand to put a little bit of weight on when you talk about that durability factor potentially, but also playing that defensive back, that corner position. It's not something that I think is typically highlighted. I think the 6 foot number, is a lot more important. We've seen that trending in the last however many years of these teams trying to go out and get these real lengthy defensive backs that can cover a lot of ground, can make plays on the ball in the air, and really because they can match up with these bigger receivers. We've even talked about a couple out of D2 that have these massive frames. We'll talk about another one here shortly, and I think that's the reason we've seen a lot of these teams trending towards that, is that so these defensive backs literally can just match up with a lot of these receivers we've seen come out of college ball that have these, really they have professional builds coming straight out of college, and it's something that I don't think we've seen quite as often. Now, a guy that we can switch over
the accolades that
and talk about in a little bit on the other side of the ball, and one of those guys that I had just mentioned is Arkell Smith from University of Central Missouri. And Arkell is a guy that, obviously, if you know anything about D2 ball, he had a dude throwing him the ball this year in Zach Zabrowski. But you can see the stats on screen. They kind of speak for themselves when it comes to Arkell. And a dude that, like I mentioned earlier, has that kind of pro build already. He was a first-team All-MIAA selection, All-American, like most of these guys on this list. A good frame, could even put a little bit of weight on if he wanted to because he has that capability. But I think a lot of that is going to be dependent on the play style and where teams see him kind of fitting in, because obviously you put on weight, you're going to be sacrificing things in other areas, whether it is speed or something along those lines. Coach Lamberson down there, the head man for the Mules at UCM, he has raved about his leadership, his ability to elevate others. He calls him the quote-unquote ultimate mule. That's what Arkell is to this team, and he has done a lot for this squad. When you look at how he stacks up, he's listed at 6'1", 194, and a dude that has just done everything for the Mules. They played in a lot of big-time football games this year against a lot of really physical opponents. You see right there, the dude is just dragging people behind him and then just ditches them with a stiff arm. Now, are you going to be dragging 5 dudes at the next level and stiff arm them off? No, I'm not an idiot, but the fact that he's doing it here means that he can stack up with whoever the hell. It does not matter. This guy has been all over the field for UCM, and he had a great balanced attack. You see a lot of these deep threats, case in point, where, I mean, it's easy to catch a ball when you're wide open, but you see a lot of the deep threats here. Zabrowski's a guy that can obviously sling it down the field, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't a viable option when it came to the short game for the Mules. He was the #1 guy, went up against the best defensive back from each team that they played every single week, breaks a ton of tackles. He's great with the yards after catch category. I'd have to find that stat for you. And for those of you who maybe missed a couple of those stats from the earlier part of the video, we're talking about a guy that has just racked up an incredible amount of numbers here, and I'll try and pull him up while I got the other stuff going on. He had his high of 154 yards. I'm trying to find the season. Here we are, season high. So we're talking about this last year, right, where they made the playoff run, over 1,400 receiving yards on about 100 catches, and he had 18 touchdowns to go with that. That is quite the year for Arkell. It was quite the year for Central Missouri, and although they are missing Arkell and a couple other key pieces, they do have Zach Zabrowski back for another year down there, which is going to be a very exciting team to follow heading into 2024. But we can move over, talk about the next guy on this list, and that's one of our D1R athletes, being Ian Marshall, the man that has certainly... I always got to mute these Twitter videos because they pop up. It always bothers me. He has certainly made a name for himself down at Northern State, and to talk about this guy and just talk about Northern State would probably be a disservice to him. He transferred in from Oklahoma State, which that D1 to D2... not something that's very uncommon, obviously, but for him, it's a little bit different because he's a guy that was actually at 3 other schools before even going to Oklahoma State. So this guy has bounced all around. I think the biggest thing for him was finally just finding a home with the Wolves over in South Dakota, because once he did, his first year with them was absolutely remarkable. We're talking about a guy who came in, NSIC Defensive Player of the Year, first team All-Conference, had All-American honors. He led the NSIC in tackles for loss, sacks, and a couple other key categories during the season in 2022. Now, coming into 2023, was dealing with some off-the-field problems, little injury issues, and didn't really have the impact early on in the season that I know he wanted to. Was still a major contributor for this squad, though. I don't want to make it seem like his impact was nullified at all. He is probably the textbook definition of what I would call a disruptor on the defensive line of scrimmage. And that's somebody that, you know, I talk about the sacks category, and this is something talked about with him a lot. He has all these sacks. He's playing, for the most part, interior defensive line. You're playing interior defensive line going up against, I believe it was 80 or 85% double or triple teams in that 2022 season. You have 14 sacks. That's impressive. So he's a guy that can go on the offensive line, or go against the offensive line and hold his ground, especially when it comes to those double teams. This is a very valuable trait to have as a big-time defensive lineman. Now, he has played a good bit of defensive end, and he's listed, depending on where you look at as a defensive end. I don't see him making that jump at the next level, because when you talk about his size, he's listed at 6'1", which, you know, if you know anything about NFL defensive ends, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it highly unlikely at 6'1" that you're going to make that jump and be a defensive end at the next level. But as an interior D lineman, you put on a little bit of weight because you know you're devoting yourself to that position. Certainly could be a possibility for Ian. And I think that's the biggest question for him moving forward, defensive end or defensive line. And the major knock is his height. But like I've said, he's played both. I would assume he'll make that full-time transition to playing interior, which he's done a majority of it his time at Northern. They don't put him outside, at least that I know of, too much. He's been more of an interior guy. So not like it'll be anything crazy for him. Now, Mike Schmidt, the head coach of the Wolves over there at Northern State, this is what he had to say about Ian and talking about his ability to come in immediately and make an impact. He said, quote, "As soon as he stepped on campus and did his workouts, we knew he was going to be the best defensive player in the league." That's the confidence they have over there in Ian Marshall, and really excited to seeing him continue to work out and show off his stuff and hopefully get a chance here to crack it at the next level. But 2 more guys for you, 1 more defense, 1 more offense. Let's start on the defensive side, and we'll stay in that defensive back spot. And I do realize, trust me, that we talk about a lot of defensive backs on the show, and I think that kind of boils down to 2 reasons. One, defensive back was them and offensive line, I think, were the highest number of just drafted into like athletes in last year's NFL draft, in a position that is always in very high demand. 2, because there's just a lot of talented defensive backs this year. I don't know, sue me. I mean, these guys are just really good, and we got to talk about them. But this guy is from a squad that we didn't cover maybe quite as much, and that is Pat Rogers from Central Washington, which is interesting because of course, if you tuned into any of Central Washington this year or heard their name thrown around at all, you're probably talking about a guy that is named Tanner Volk and looks a little bit different than Pat here. But not to be outshined, Pat Rogers has put together some seriously good play over out west there for the Wildcats. You talk about a guy that's in the D2 Football Elite 100, first-team All-American, first-team Lone Star Conference. He has... Oh, that was an easy grab, wasn't it? He's got a lot of plays that are a little bit more decisive than that one. Has been a great on-man coverage guy for the Wildcats over there. Also blocks kicks and does some things on special teams, which you love to see from guys trying to make that jump to the next level. And what's really in this guy's favor, and I'm going to pull it up here in just a second, his pro day numbers, once you get a look at these, you're going to understand some of the hype about this young man. But just turning on the tape, right there, you see a physical nature you don't often get in a cornerback or even maybe a safety. A dude that is not afraid to lower the shoulder, playing the ball through the air, staying with the receiver. The return game usually pretty decent out of him as well. This guy is very multifaceted in his game. I'm excited to see what he's able to do in getting a shot at the next level, flying across the field, very instinctual guy. But what I talked about with him and what I mentioned earlier are those pro day numbers. Right? Let's take a look at those, and I think that's what really stands out about Pat and his ability to open some eyes at the next level. Here we go. And now these are from the Central Washington Twitter. You can go ahead and check these out, but these are the pro day numbers from Pat Rogers. Let's start it off with the vertical jump. 39.5 inches. We all saw Tavion McCarthy go viral for that 40-some-inch jump. Tavion obviously played with him here at Northern. All credit in the world to him. My man Pat is not far behind. This dude got up. That is ridiculous. That is an incredible jump from the man here. How about the 40-yard dash? A 4.51. Certainly respectable. I'm sure he would have loved to see another 4 right there instead of a 5. He's that close. Just a little bit off. Still, with a guy who's built like this, has a good amount of muscle mass, that is not a bad time at all. Something that... we talk about it all the time. You just have to be good enough to check a box. He checks a box with that 4.51, absolutely. Broad jump, 10 foot 6 inches. Love to see that. And then I believe they had a couple more down here. How about the 3-cone? Under 7 seconds in the 3-cone is always a great thing. And then the bench press, 12 reps. Again, defensive back, that is all you can ask for. 12 reps from a DB is pretty solid. That's not anything that... maybe jumps off the paper, but certainly something to keep an eye on for him. So Pat Rogers is a name that I admit I was not really familiar with going into this process. Let it be known. I'm hip to Pat Rogers now. I'm excited to see where he goes. Let's finish things off with a running back. Save one of the guys I'm most excited about for last, and a dude I was very aware of throughout the duration of the regular season. And actually, I should close it out by giving you the measurements on Pat. I didn't do that. 5'11", 190, so a decent frame on him. Not anything, again, that jumps off the paper, but a dude that you saw the muscle mass on him. This guy's put together. He's built, durable, a guy that doesn't miss games. Those are all things that NFL people really take into high value. They take that. It's very important to them. But let's finish it off with a running back from Hillsdale, Michael Herzog. And this guy, I would assume many of you are familiar with, but maybe not in a very large capacity. I'll cut on the tape and just show you what this guy's all about, because he has been a nightmare for defenses all season long this past year. Herzog is a converted wide receiver, actually, over at Hillsdale. He came in as a wide receiver his freshman year and then was converted after that. Now, where it gets interesting is that was 2019, I believe. Then 2020, you missed the year because of COVID. Now, 2021, coming back ready to play football, he misses the entire spring and the fall with an ACL injury. So now you're talking about missing back-to-back football seasons, and in many case scenarios, some people might either hang it up or, it'd be a very slow process to get them back involved into the game, because as someone who has gone through ACL injuries, that is tough as hell. To come back from that, to have confidence in your leg and confidence in your own ability after a major injury like that, on top of missing a season already because of COVID, right? He comes back, dominates in 2022, and this past year was even better. This dude put up some, ridiculous stats. In 11 games, had over 1,300 yards. He was averaging over 120 per game. He had 21 touchdowns on the year. That's something. He was a Harlan Hill finalist, so he was certainly recognized and had the accolades to go along with some of those numbers. And, first-team All-American, a co-GMAC Player of the Year. He's got some experience on the kickoff return, which I'm not sure we may or may not see here on the film. But what's really, kind of takes to the next level with this guy is apparently he's from Windsor. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. But the fact that he's from Windsor means that he's got a much better shot at going to the CFL. And again, if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's fine. The CFL has a quota that they're only allowed to take on. I don't know if quota is the right word, but they're only allowed to take on so many American players to kind of like maintain the integrity of the Canadian Football League. Now, for guys like Mike who are from Canada, come play college ball in the States, they obviously don't qualify as an American and thus wouldn't take up one of those spots. So that's actually really big news for him, because he seems to be gearing up for that CFL draft, and he put up some wild numbers at the CFL Combine that we'll take a look at. But before that, the dude went to the College Gridiron Showcase, which is a kind of a smaller school showing. He had 2 touchdowns in that game. But let's look at the numbers from the CFL Combine, because that's where he really showed up and showed out. These are the numbers from Mike on that day. 4.55 40. Again, under a 7-second 3-cone. His vert was a 39-inch, and then shuttle was at a 4.2. So, talking about some really solid numbers, dare I say, like elite numbers, especially coming from the D2 level, like really elite numbers, and numbers that are going to put him into a lot of conversations in some big buildings. But the CFL draft is in April 30th. So he's got less than a month now until that CFL draft, and that's where you can probably expect him to hear his name called, hopefully, in that draft. That'd be pretty cool to have a guy come out of D2 and go make an immediate impact in the CFL. But really excited about his game. Had a good Harlan Hill campaign going on a Hillsdale team that, like, let's face it, offense may have been lackluster at times. He was a guy that kept the pace and the tempo up. They struggled at times. Hillsdale was a little bit inconsistent this last year, but one of the consistent factors for that Chargers team was Michael Herzog, and he was a dude that really did it all for the Chargers over there. So shout out to all those guys. Once again, anyone else you want me to cover, let me know in the comments, but I feel like we've done a good job of getting to a lot of these players. Finally, though, let's close out the episode. I told you a little bit in the opener. I might have got on the April Fools. Let's take a look at some of the best of the April Fools from today. And Michael Herzog, by the way, 5'9", 200 pounds. So decent build on him. Obviously not the tallest guy in the world, but at a position like running back, doesn't matter. Not as much, at least. Not as much.